So today we're coming from our dryland legume pasture systems trial site here at Piangil. So we've got a range of pasture species here that we've trialling within this mallee environment, including Ceradella, Medic, Rose Clover, Bladder Clover, Bicerula, Gland Clover and Trigonella. So we're also looking at novel ways to establish these pastures within the farming system. What we're looking at is twin sowing, which is putting hard seeded legumes down with the crop in the year before you want the pasture and allowing that seed to soften and become a pasture in the following year. We're also looking at summer sowing, which is also taking that hard seeded legume seed, but we're sowing it in the early summer period, which is giving time for that seed to soften over late summer, early autumn and become a viable pasture in that year. And of course we're comparing that to what we're achieving by just sowing more expensive scarified viable seed as an autumn sown option, so sowing the pasture there. So we're looking at the cost benefit of bringing those pasture establishment costs down. So in 2019, that was the first year where all the pastures were established on the site. And what we saw was the Margarita Ceradella was really well suited to both those novel seeding systems of both twin sowing and summer sowing. Options including the Rose Clover, the Bladder Clover and also the Gland Clover, done equally as well under a twin sowing system as what they were autumn sown in terms of crop plant establishment. And also Trigonella performed quite well under the sowing summer sowing system. However, Medic and Bicerula weren't well suited to either of the novel systems and had far less plants per metre squared established than what we could establish with both of those pastures in an autumn sown system. So in terms of productivity of that first pasture year, which was 2019, we've got Medic and also Rose Clover here perform the best in terms of the regenerating pastures with 2 tonne per hectare of biomass throughout that growing season. Ceradella, including the Bladder Clover, each produced about 1.5 tonne per hectare, but things like the Bicerula, the Gland Clover and the Trigonella were a bit more disappointing and only produced about 1 tonne per hectare of biomass in that first season. So we're comparing the pastures treatments to some controls. We've got 2 controls in this trial. One is the vetch, sown vetch system, where the vetch produced 3.2 tonne per hectare of biomass in 2019. And we also terminated that vetch in early September, so it had accumulated that biomass earlier than the other pasture species. And also with, we've got a continuous cereal system here that we're looking at. So in 2019 it was barley, and we achieved quite high yields of the barley of 2.8 tonne per hectare of grain yield. So the barley was also productive in that first year. So we've also been measuring and monitoring what impact the pasture phases are having on the productivity of the whole rotation. In 2019 we measured what happened to nitrogen levels under these pasture treatments, and what we found was the clovers such as Gland Clover, such as Bladder Clover and such as Rose Clover all increased nitrogen levels in the soil by 45 to 65 kilograms of N per hectare relative to the starting level. The other pasture species though, Medic, Bicerula, Ceradella, Trigonella, they tended to increase soil nitrogen by more like 20 to 25 units of N per hectare. But in comparison to our continuous cereal treatment, it actually, as you'd expect, depleted nitrogen out of the system. So the soil nitrogen levels during the cereal phase actually decreased by 45 kilograms of nitrogen per hectare. Now those big differences in nitrogen available to the crop obviously carried through to the next year, and we sowed a wheat crop across all the treatments at this site. And what we found was the crop was quite responsive to those different nitrogen levels. We had a 0.9 tonne per hectare increase in grain yield in the pasture plots relative to the grain yield achieved in the continuous cereal. And we also observed a 1.5% increase in grain protein as well. So demonstrating that the nitrogen differences in the pastures relative to the continuous cereal was having a big impact. However, we didn't pick up much difference between the pasture species in terms of impact on the following crop. So basically all the pasture species, including our vetch treatment, produced a pretty equivalent yield benefit and also grain protein benefit to that 2020 wheat crop. So in 2021, this year, we've allowed all the pasture species to regenerate from that seed bank that they established in that first pasture year of 2019. So what we've seen in terms of having the best regeneration after last year's cropping phase has been Medic, Rose Clover, Bladder Clover, and also Bicerula, which despite having lower productivity than the other three pastures, has a very small seed, but it's very hard seeded as well, and that's persisted well through the cropping season to produce a great stand of pasture at this site in 2021. Unfortunately, the Trigonella, the Gland Clover, and also the Ceradella at this site have not performed in terms of regeneration as well as the other pasture species, and would be relying on re-establishment through either twin or summer sowing or autumn sowing to have a viable pasture stand at this site in this year. So this trial site's in its fourth and final year. To keep in touch with the final data from this site, plus all the other projects that we have going on across the Mallee, stay engaged with Mallee Sustainable Farming through social media channels and also at upcoming events.